Hey, good morning, Trondheim friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Patio Ponderings. Today, my patio is in the Fellowship Hall of Trondheim Church, nice and cozy and warm by the fireplace. And it is a little part of the church that feels kind of like home. And so I like to sit here. And that home feeling is part of why I chose it today. As we talked about last week, we are working through the Gospel of Mark for a few months until after Easter. And in this week's story, we had a couple of interesting episodes from Jesus' very early ministry. He's just getting going. He does the healing of a paralyzed man, and then he hangs out with the sinners and the tax collectors, and it's garnering him all kinds of attention. He's already got large crowds following him. But in this story, the verse that caught my attention, which always catches my attention when I read it, is this one. It's chapter 2, verse 1. After a few days, Jesus was back to Capernaum, and people heard that he was at home. Wait a minute. He was at home? Jesus had a home? He hung out in his house? It started, whenever I come across this verse, I start to think about Jesus like human life. Like, what did he do? How did he live? Who were his friends? And that takes us back a little further into thinking about his adult years before he began his ministry, of which we know very, very little. So if we look at the Gospels as a whole, Matthew and Luke give us the birth stories of Jesus. And then we get one scene in Luke in which Jesus is at the temple and he stays behind, gets separated from his parents, and they have to go back and find him. In all of the Gospels, that's the latest point that we hear anything about Jesus until he begins his ministry around age 30. So we've got nearly half of his life, right? A gap of 15 to 17 years there likely. Half of his life where we hear nothing in the Gospels of what those years were like. And those years are very formative years. If we think about our own late teens and 20s, those are formative years, those times when we come of age, when we develop our own identities, adopt our own values, find our professions and our vocations and our call in the world. And we know nothing about this time in Jesus. There are some writings outside of Scripture that may or may not be very reliable, that tell us some things, but there's just no certainty in them. And there's only a couple very small clues that we have in Scripture about them. One comes in Mark chapter 6 when it says Jesus returns to his hometown, which is Nazareth, by the way, not Capernaum. So there's something interesting there. And it says, isn't this Jesus the carpenter? So that gives us a clue that Jesus did indeed have a profession, a very everyday trade that he did, likely with his father Joseph. And the other clues that that are more implicit rather than explicit is that Jesus most certainly was involved in his faith and in the Jewish life. So he went to synagogue, he knew the scriptures of the Old Testament, he participated in the rituals and the observances. So that's about all we know for sure. And so it just leaves us wondering and pondering, what was Jesus like just as a regular human guy? Was he funny? Did he have a sense of humor? Did he have a lot of friends, or was he quiet? How much did he know about what was to come at this point? So many things that are just left out in these stories and just left to our imagination. And so we wonder and we ponder. And you know what? That's okay. That's one of the things that I really value about the Jewish traditions of reading scripture, is that they really free themselves to wonder and imagine what's between the lines and behind the scenes. So I'm going to invite you to do the same thing, to wonder and imagine what Jesus was like as just a human young adult. And if someone out there is really creative, like a creative writer, I would love to hear a story that you come up with that depicts the possibilities of Jesus as a young adult before he begins his ministry. Looking forward, as always, to what you are thinking about in this regard, and stay warm. The temperatures are going up, and I hope to see you all Sunday. Bye.